On June 4, 1943, near Railroad Street in Mexia, Texas, the foundational certainties of Nazi ideology began to crumble. Corporal Unifizia Veer Burkhardt, his pencil trembling slightly, committed observations to his hidden diary, words that would have earned him solitary confinement if discovered by his own officers. His entry captured a profound cognitive dissonance. The Americans must be lying to us. No nation could possess such abundance while fighting a war on two fronts. Through the train window, he had just witnessed a stunning, undeniable visual argument contradicting 3 years of carefully cultivated Nazi propaganda. At 10 o'clock at night, electric lights blazed from every farmhouse, every street corner, and every shop window, an endless, sprawling constellation of electricity stretching across the Texas plains. This opulence stood in stark contrast to the Reich, where total blackout regulations had plunged German cities into darkness since 1940. Even before the war, rural electrification reached barely 20% of German farms. Yet here, in what Nazi rhetoric had dismissed as a decadent, collapsed America, electricity flowed with seemingly limitless capacity. As the transport halted, 1,850 veterans of Erwin RML's famed Africa Corps disembarked. Crucially, they stepped down, not from cramped cattle cars or rudimentary freight wagons, but from cushioned Pullman coaches, complete with dining services and sleeping berths, a level of logistical care that amplified the psychological shock. The entire population of Mahia had turned out to witness the arrival of these elite desert fighters. What none, German or American, fully grasped was that this moment would trigger the most profound psychological transformation in modern military history. A systematic, peaceful demolition of Nazi ideology achieved purely through the sheer display of American industrial capacity. The mathematics of Allied victory were being written not in strategic battle plans, but in production statistics that would soon shatter every assumption these soldiers carried about their enemies, their homeland, and their cause. This process of revelation was precipitated by the military disaster weeks earlier. The collapse had begun decisively on May 13, 1943, in Tunisia, when General Jürgen von Arnim, RML's replacement, surrendered along with approximately 250,000 to 275,000 German and Italian soldiers. The numbers varied as scattered units continued surrendering over several days. The Wehrmacht's most experienced desert fighters, men who had driven the British back to Egypt and earned the grudging respect of Montgomery himself, were suddenly prisoners. Among them was Headman Friedrich Radke, holder of the Iron Cross First Class, a veteran of the France campaign, and wounded twice in North Africa. Radke's diary, discovered decades later in the National Archives, provides historians with the most detailed and crucial account of the psychological impact of American captivity on German soldiers. The journey from defeat to revelation began at the port of Oran, Algeria. As Radke and nearly 30,000 other captured soldiers waited in makeshift camps for transport ships, American efficiency immediately began to crack their preconceptions. The U.S. Army processed thousands of prisoners daily with an organizational precision that surpassed anything the Wehrmacht had achieved even at the height of its power. Identity cards were photographed and filed. Medical examinations were swiftly completed. Inoculations were administered, and Geneva Convention rights were strictly honored. The process of surrender was managed flawlessly, executed in fluent German by American officers specifically trained for the moment. Yet, the true psychological rupture began not with military force, but with the sheer, incomprehensible abundance of basic supplies. Oberreiter Hansmuir, captured alongside the 21st Panzer Division, detailed this initial disorientation 8 months later in a letter home. Waiting for transport in the holding cage at Oran, Muir noted, "The Americans fed us better than we had eaten in 6 months of desert warfare." The prisoners were served white bread, genuine coffee, and meat twice daily. This level of provision was initially dismissed as crude propaganda intended merely to impress the defeated enemy. The devastating realization was that this lavish menu represented the standard, utterly unremarkable military ration of the United States Army. The Liberty ships designated to carry this human cargo across the Atlantic were themselves colossal, floating symbols of American industrial power. The SS Robert E. Pyrie, for instance, had been fully assembled in a staggering 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes at the Kaiser shipyards in Richmond, California, a fact that would have been instantly rejected as impossible enemy propaganda had the Germans known the truth. These vessels, churned out at a peak rate of 3 per day, were returning from delivering material to the European theater. Instead of sailing back empty, they were repurposed to carry up to 30,000 POWs per month by the summer of 1943. The 2-week transatlantic voyage in July 1943 served as the second, relentless phase of psychological demolition. Feld Kurt Zimmerman of the 90th Light Division maintained a precise, detailed account of the crossing, preserved in correspondence with his family after his eventual repatriation. Zimmerman observed that the ship's crew openly disposed of more food waste each day. Half-eaten steaks, entire loaves of fresh bread, gallons of milk that simply sat too long, that his entire company had received in their combined weekly rations during the final, starving months in Africa. They did this openly, without thought, not to mock us, Zimmerman wrote, but because to them this waste meant nothing. Their supply was limitless. The ships themselves transformed into mandatory classrooms, illustrating the impossible scale of American capacity. The prisoners learned, often from talkative American guards, that the vessel transporting them was just one of 2,710 Liberty ships constructed during the conflict. Each required 250,000 individual parts, sourced from components manufactured in 32 different states. Even the engines, generating 900 horsepower per cylinder, were built in 3 separate factories and then assembled in ports that had scarcely existed 2 years prior. Lieutenant Colonel Wilhelm von Stobern, whose aristocratic Prussian lineage traced service back to Frederick the Great, captured the defining moment in his later memoirs. As our ship approached the American coast, he wrote, I watched the radar antenna rotating above the bridge. This technology, which we believed only we, and perhaps the British possessed in limited quantities, was standard equipment on a simple cargo vessel. It was at that moment, he concluded, that the suspicion hardened into certainty. Germany had already lost the war. August 2, 1943. The arrival at Norfolk Naval Base, Virginia, delivered the final, crushing blow, shattering the last tenacious remnants of Nazi propaganda regarding American industrial weakness. The sprawling naval and industrial complex at Norfolk consumed 4,300 acres, its immense docks stretching for miles. This single port functioned as a staggering testament to American logistical might, its cranes simultaneously servicing dozens of vessels. The throughput was astonishing. In a single day, Norfolk handled more tonnage than the entire German port Hamburg could process in a week. Gerrit Jon Baer, a factory worker conscripted from the Ruhr, counted 47 cargo ships in various stages of loading or unloading. Baer recorded his observations in a clandestine diary, noting the electric power driving the operations. Each crane, he wrote, moved loads smoothly and continuously, utilizing energy that would have required the labor of a dozen men and horses back in Germany. Crucially, the air was free of the acrid coal smoke that choked their own industrial centers, a silent sign of technological advancement and widespread electrification. As the prisoners formed columns for the march to the waiting trains, the journey revealed a civilian prosperity that utterly contradicted Nazi propaganda. They passed vast parking lots crammed with hundreds of civilian automobiles, vehicles belonging to ordinary dock workers. In Germany, private automobile ownership remained strictly the privilege of the wealthy and the party elite. The Volkswagen, promised the German people since 1934, remained a hollow propaganda dream, with fewer than 1,000 ever reaching civilian hands. Here, laborers drove their own cars to their shifts. Yet, nothing prepared the prisoners for the unexpected luxury of the transport itself. Instead of the anticipated boxcars or the crude 40 and 8-foot wagons, designed for 40 men or 8 horses, which had carried German troops across Europe, they were directed toward full passenger coaches. These were Pullman cars, complete with padded seats convertible to sleeping berths, dining cars featuring white tablecloths and silver cutlery, and observation cars offering panoramic views. We boarded like tourists, not prisoners, recorded Headman Radka. The discomfort of the American guards was palpable. One sergeant, perhaps sensing the irony, apologized that the air conditioning was not functioning properly in their car, a technology the prisoners had been led to believe existed only on Hitler's personal train. This 3-day rail journey, transporting them from Norfolk to the distant camps of Texas and Oklahoma, proved to be a more immediate and destructive force against Nazi ideology than any military defeat. As the trains traversed Virginia, the prisoners pressed their faces against the windows, witnessing an America that official doctrine insisted could not exist. Every small town, Martinsville, Danville, Greensboro, blazed with illumination. Communities that in Germany would have been fortunate to possess a single electric street lamp displayed illuminated shop windows, electric signs, and houses with lights burning brightly in multiple rooms. The trains passed factories running night shifts, their windows glowing, their parking lots full even at midnight. Oberg Reitermeyer, whose father served as a Nazi party bloc leader in Hamburg, documented the shock in a letter discovered in 1987. "We passed through dozens of cities that first night. Everyone had more electricity than all of Hamburg." When he challenged a guard, claiming he must be lying, the American merely shrugged and confirmed that every town had possessed electricity since the 1920s, adding simply, "You will see." The train eventually halted for water and coal in Roanoke, Virginia. The German prisoners bore witness to a chilling efficiency. American railway workers accomplished in 30 minutes what German engineers would have budgeted 2 hours for. This speed was driven by a sophisticated technological ecosystem, automated coal loaders, electric water pumps, and mechanized lubrication systems, each element demonstrating a decisive technical superiority. Even more unsettling was the casual affluence of the American laborers themselves. They wore sturdy leather boots, an item that represented 2 months' wages for a German worker. They drank chilled Coca-Cola from disposable glass bottles, discarding the empties without a second thought, and chain-smoked cigarettes, often stubbing them out half-finished. This spectacle of resource abundance was meticulously cataloged by Gefreiter Heinrich Muller, an electrical engineer who had worked for Siemens before the conflict. Muller calculated that the single railway yard where their train paused consumed more electricity in 1 hour than his entire district in Berlin utilized in a day. He recorded the observation. The waste was magnificent. Lights were left burning in empty buildings. Electric fans spun idly in vacant rooms. It was the unmistakable carelessness associated with infinite resource. As the trains crossed the threshold into Tennessee and Kentucky, the full scale of American industrial power came into sharp, undeniable focus. Through the windows, they observed endless stretches of factories, each facility dwarfing anything most of the prisoners had ever seen in Germany. The colossal Alcoa aluminum plant in Tennessee, for example, extended for 3 miles along the river, its electric furnaces consuming 175,000 kilowatts of power, a figure exceeding the entire electrical consumption of the city of Munich. Near Louisville, the pace slackened as they approached the rubber town complex. Here, immense synthetic rubber plants had sprung from empty fields in barely 18 months. For massive facilities, each employing thousands, were producing 800,000 tons of synthetic rubber annually. This statistic was particularly damning. Germany, despite pioneering the process, had never managed to produce more than 120,000 tons in its best year. Oberleutnant Erich Hoffmann, a chemist formerly with IG Farben, grasped the implications immediately. In a post-war interview, he recalled, "I knew those plants. I could see the distillation columns, the catalytic crackers. Each facility was more advanced than anything we had built, and there were 4 of them just in this one location. They told us there were dozens more across the country." The journey culminated in the passage past Ford's Willow Run plant outside Detroit, a structure visible for miles. This single factory, constructed in just 9 months, achieved the impossible, producing a B-24 Liberator bomber every 63 minutes. At its operational peak, 42,000 workers assembled bombers from 1,550,000 parts, sourced from 1,500 subcontractors. The plant itself occupied 2.5 million square feet of floor space and required more electricity than the entire German city of Cologne. Witnessing this relentless output, Hauptmann Verli, a Luftwaffe pilot shot down over Tunisia, pressed his face against the glass. He counted 17 B-24s in various stages of completion visible from the train car. The propaganda had assured them that American planes were inferior, hastily built, and destined to fail in combat, but the observable precision an unparalleled scale, the assembly lines render that propaganda utterly hollow. The deeper these trains penetrate the American interior, the more completely the ingrained Nazi mythology of American inefficiency and structural weakness dissolved. In St. Louis, the prisoners crossed the colossal Mississippi River via the Eads Bridge, an engineering marvel that spanned a waterway below which grain barges carried a volume of harvest exceeding the entire German yield of 1942. Along both banks, the POWs witnessed vast grain elevators, each structure capable of storing enough wheat to sustain a major German city for months. Unratia Karl Schmidt, a farmer's son from Bavaria, meticulously recorded this staggering abundance in his diary. The Americans transport food as we transport ammunition, in endless quantities, without concern for loss. I watched them loading a single barge with enough wheat to feed my entire village for 5 years. The crane operator was eating a sandwich with meat thicker than our weekly ration. This vision of industrial plenty only intensified in Kansas City, where the train halted near a massive stockyard. Tens of thousands of cattle waited for slaughter, and the pervasive smell of meat-packing plants carried for miles. German POWs, many of whom had subsisted on a meager 200 grams of meat per week in Africa, when fortunate, watched American workers consume thick beef sandwiches during their midday break. They ate meat like we ate bread, wrote prisoner Paul Fisher, correcting himself immediately. No, that's wrong. They ate meat like we wish we could eat bread. The guards, exhibiting casual affluence, purchased 20 hamburgers from a station stand, meat, cheese, and vegetables on white bread for only 15 cents each, paying with a single dollar bill. This was not a special provision. This was the American civilian standard. The arrival at the camps themselves delivered the next profound level of cognitive demolition. Camp Hearn, Texas, constructed in just 4 months, housed between 3,000 and 4,800 prisoners in conditions that far exceeded what most had experienced as civilians in Europe. The wooden barracks featured electric lights, flush toilets, hot showers, and reliable steam heat. Each building utilized more lumber than entire German villages possessed. The camp hospital proved particularly astounding to the captured medical personnel. Oberst Lieutenant Colonel Dr. Friedrich Bauer, chief surgeon of the 164th Light Division, found himself in a facility better equipped than most German civilian hospitals. It contained X-ray machines, modern surgical equipment, and pharmaceutical supplies that had been completely unavailable in Germany since 1941. Dr. Bauer later testified to the shocking reality. They had penicillin, this miracle drug that we had only heard rumors about. They used it freely, even on prisoners with minor infections. He noted the stark contrast. German soldiers were dying for want of basic sulfur drugs, yet the Americans supplied their most advanced medicines without hesitation to the enemy. Finally, the camp kitchen became an unintentional classroom demonstrating American prosperity. Prisoners assigned cooking duties encountered walk-in refrigerators, high-capacity electric mixers, automated dishwashers, and gas ranges capable of preparing meals for 5,000 men. The daily ration included fresh milk, eggs, meat, vegetables, and white bread, further cementing the scale of America's unburdened industrial and agricultural capacity. The arrival of German prisoners in the American hinterlands immediately presented them with material quantities that German civilians had not witnessed since the austere rationing began in 1939. This initial shock was often most acutely felt in the mess halls. Feldwebel Otto Krebs, a former hotel chef from Munich, documented the profound emotional and moral conflict caused by the mandated surplus. He wrote, "Today, we threw away more food than my family has seen in 3 years. Not spoiled food, simply excess. The strict American logistical regulations, designed to ensure every prisoner received full rations, required preparing a consistent 10% more than needed. The resulting surplus was systematically discarded." Krebs confessed, "I wept as I threw perfectly good bread into the garbage," a testament to the chasm between the privation of the Reich and the profligate abundance of the United States. By September 1943, the severe labor shortage impacting American agriculture and industry necessitated the widespread employment of these German prisoners of war, PWs, in fields and factories across the country. This utilitarian decision, driven purely by necessity, ultimately served as a more effective psychological weapon than any official propaganda program could have hoped to achieve. Groups of prisoners were trucked daily to their assigned work sites, traversing the American heartland without the typical restrictions of blindfolds or confined routes. They became unwilling witnesses to the nation's staggering economic might. They saw the endless mechanized fields of corn and wheat, the sprawling factories running 3 critical shifts, the shops overflowing with consumer goods, the parking lots dense with personal automobiles, and the ordinary homes equipped with modern conveniences like refrigerators and radios. The industrial disparity was often the most immediate revelation. At a cotton gin facility outside Houston, Overshoot's Herbert Lang recorded his observations of American mechanization. He watched a single humming machine process more raw cotton in 1 hour than his entire German village could have handled in a month using traditional manual methods. Crucially, this gin was powered by electricity supplied by the Colorado River Authority, an integral part of the rural electrification program that had brought centralized power to 90% of Texas farms by 1943. Lang noted that the farmer who owned the operation was nobody special, neither aristocracy nor a dedicated party member, but merely a farmer. Yet, this ordinary citizen possessed electricity, running water, a truck, a car, and a tractor. Furthermore, Lang observed that the farm workers, including the black laborers, ate lunches from boxes containing more nutrient-rich food than German industrial workers received in an entire week. Lang concluded with a chilling realization, and this was normal. Every farm we passed was the same. Further north, in Nebraska, prisoners assigned to sugar beet fields encountered agricultural mechanization on a scale that defied European comprehension. They learned that a single combine harvester could perform the work of 100 men. The field stretched unimpeded to the horizon, each parcel often exceeding the size of entire German counties. The local farmers spoke casually of crop yields that would have been considered pure fantasy in the Reich. 60 bushels of wheat per acre, compared to Germany's maximum of 30 bushels on its best land. Gefreiter Wilhelm Hoffmann, working on a farm outside Scottsbluff, rode the generational wealth gap. The farmer's son, a boy of 16, drove a tractor worth more than everything my father had earned in his lifetime. When Hoffmann mentioned the cost, the boy merely laughed, stating that it was not even a particularly good tractor, as his father was awaiting a new, more advanced model from John Deere. Perhaps the most devastating revelations were reserved for those prisoners assigned to work near or within American industrial centers. While the strictures of the Geneva Convention prohibited direct involvement in munitions or war production, a critical technicality permitted prisoners of war to work in industries that directly freed American civilian workers from military deployment. This regulatory loophole allowed thousands of German prisoners to witness the raw, overwhelming capacity of the American industrial machine firsthand, exposing them to the true economic engine powering the Allied war effort. For many prisoners, the first undeniable evidence of America's overwhelming power lay not in battle reports, but in the mundane landscape of industrial production. At a Campbell soup factory in New Jersey, German prisoners of war stood aghast as they witnessed production lines that processed more tomatoes in a single day than most German food processing plants handled in an entire month. The facility, operating with a skeleton crew composed mainly of women and elderly men due to the mobilization of younger workers, nonetheless exceeded peacetime production levels. Stabsfeld Webel Ernst Vanner, who had prior experience in a German food plant, meticulously documented the stunning degree of automation, electric conveyor belts, automatic filling machines, and steam cookers processing hundreds of cans simultaneously. The efficiency was personified by a single elderly woman, who, while calmly sipping coffee and listening to radio, monitored controls that managed output requiring 50 workers in Germany. Near Detroit, prisoners unloading coal at a power plant gained a crucial glimpse into the sheer scale of the automotive industry's conversion to war production. Across the water, the colossal River Rouge complex stood, employing 100,000 workers dedicated to manufacturing jeeps, aircraft engines, and tanks. The facility's energy consumption alone was staggering, 1.5 million kilowatts of electricity daily, a figure exceeding the consumption of the entire city of Hamburg. It was here that Oberreiter Franz Kellner, recorded an observation that shattered fundamental assumptions about American society. "We could see the parking lots," Kellner wrote, "thousands of cars belonging to workers." He noted the profound cultural difference. Workers in Germany, even our officers, rarely own cars. Here, factory workers drove to work. The disbelief intensified when their guard claimed that many laborers owned two vehicles, one for work, one for family use. Kellner noted, "We thought he was mocking us." By the winter of 1943, the cumulative impact of these observations, the scale, the automation, and the widespread material affluence, was producing a profound psychological crisis among the captured soldiers. American intelligence officers dubbed this phenomenon the ideological collapse syndrome. The Special Project Division, operating the secret re-education program under Provost Marshal General's office, documented a sharp increase in prisoners requesting access to American newspapers, books, and educational materials. Major Paul Noëllan, a member of the monitoring team, reported in December 1943 that the prisoners had ceased arguing when confronted with production statistics. They have seen too much. The most fanatical Nazis have become quiet. While maintaining loyalty to their homeland, they ceased speaking of victory and began openly questioning the foundational narratives they had been fed about America. This transformation was soon reflected in the prisoners' own publications. Der Ruf, the Call, the camp newspaper published at Fort Kearny, Rhode Island, gradually shifted its editorial focus from defiant nationalism to sober discussions of democracy, economic systems, and post-war reconstruction. The editors, carefully vetted anti-Nazi prisoners, found their audience increasingly receptive to these new ideas. Perhaps the most damning summation of the prisoners' disillusionment came from Lieutenant Herman Gutz, captured with the 10th Panzer Division, in a letter that passed American censors. "We were told America was a mongrel nation, weak, divided, controlled by Jews, incapable of military prowess. Every day I am here, I see the opposite. This is the most organized, unified, and powerful nation on earth. We were told fairy tales by criminals." The most profound and devastating blow to Nazi ideology originated from an unexpected, yet fundamental, source: the humane treatment accorded to Italian prisoners following Italy's capitulation in September 1943. Italian prisoners of war who agreed to cooperate were subsequently organized into Italian service units, granted privileges that included superior quarters, increased remuneration, and a significant degree of personal freedom. German prisoners, meanwhile, were forced to witness their former Axis allies working directly alongside American personnel, dining in American restaurants, and even engaging socially with American women. This stark juxtaposition of reality against the rigid tenets of Nazi racial theory provoked intense cognitive dissonance. Hedman Friedrich Schultz encapsulated this ideological collapse in his writings. "The Italians betrayed us, yet they are treated better than we treated them as allies. They work freely, earn money, send packages home. The Americans show them no hatred. This democracy we were taught to despise appears more honorable than our own system." The psychological impact peaked during Christmas 1943. American civic organizations, churches, and private groups collectively dispatched over 500,000 Christmas packages to German prisoners, enemies who, only months prior, had actively sought to kill American soldiers. Each package contained essential comforts: cigarettes, candy, toiletries, and games. Though strict regulations prevented most prisoners from accepting invitations, local communities extended invitations to Christmas dinners. At Camp Hearn, Texas, the local Methodist church choir performed traditional Christmas carols in German for the detainees. Women from Hearn community sent in homemade cookies and cakes, while the Boy Scouts delivered handmade Christmas cards. This overwhelming display of Christian charity toward declared enemies systematically shattered the final remnants of Nazi racial and moral superiority theory. Oberleutnant Walter Mueller, whose brother had perished during the bombing of Hamburg, recorded his astonishment. "They know we are their enemies. Many have sons and husbands fighting against our armies. Yet they show us Christian charity, not propaganda, but genuine kindness. What kind of people treat enemies this way? Only those absolutely certain of victory and profoundly secure in their power." The Christmas feast itself defied comprehension. Turkey, ham, mashed potatoes, gravy, vegetables, pies, and ice cream were served in quantities that Germany had not witnessed since before the First World War. Prisoners consumed the food until physically ill, unable to grasp such vast resources being lavished upon their foes. Feldwebel Hansa wrote that they ate like kings, better than German generals eat, better than party leaders. The guards confirmed this was not a special accommodation. It was a normal American Christmas dinner, the same meal every American family was consuming. The implication was clear. If they could feed prisoners so opulently, the resources available to their own fighting forces must be limitless. By early 1944, the intellectual conversion was underway, with over 40,000 German prisoners enrolled in extensive educational programs. They studied English, American history, mathematics, and sciences. The University of Chicago provided correspondence courses, while Stanford University dispatched professors to lecture on the principles of democracy and economics. The thirst for knowledge became insatiable. Prisoners who had been indoctrinated to believe Americans were culturally illiterate barbarians suddenly discovered vast libraries containing millions of books, universities welcoming all social classes, and scientific research that led the world. They read. American newspapers circulated freely within the camps, allowing prisoners to compare multiple viewpoints, a stark impossibility within the confines of Nazi Germany. This intellectual exposure was paralleled by startling scientific openness. Man Dr. Wilhelm von Braun, a physicist conscripted from the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute, attended advanced lectures on atomic physics at Camp Shelby. He later recorded his profound observations. American professors, including Jewish refugees from Germany, taught us without hatred. They spoke of science as universal, belonging to all humanity. They were years ahead of German research, and yet they shared knowledge with enemies. This profound generosity of spirit, he concluded, was utterly incomprehensible to minds shaped and restricted by Nazi ideology. Simultaneously, the camp theater screened not propaganda reels, but regular Hollywood productions. Prisoners watched Gone with the Wind, witnessing a depiction of American defeat and subsequent recovery that unexpectedly resonated with their own precarious situation. They saw The Grapes of Wrath, expressing astonishment that Americans would permit such devastating self-criticism to be shown even to their enemies. They hide nothing, wrote Lieutenant Joseph Kramer. They show their problems, their failures, their conflicts. Yet this honesty makes them stronger, not weaker. In Germany, such criticism would mean death. Here it is considered patriotic. By the spring of 1944, as American production reached its zenith, expanded prisoner labor programs put these men face-to-face with a full, terrifying might of the U.S. industrial capacity. German POWs worked in canneries, mills, and fabrication plants, witnessing a scale that no propaganda could counter. At the colossal Higgins Boat Factory in New Orleans, prisoners unloaded the steel that would become the landing craft crucial for the impending D-Day invasion. They watched stunned as workers assembled 700 boats per month, each requiring 20,000 distinct parts. The factory employed 20,000 workers, including thousands of women who expertly operated cranes, welded hulls, and managed complex production lines. Stabs Feldwebel Kurt Zimmerman chronicled the scene. Women doing men's work, Negroes operating complex machinery, teenagers running drilling equipment. Everything we were told was impossible in a democracy, yet production never stopped. 3 shifts, 24 hours, 7 days a week. They produced more boats in a month than our entire Navy built in a year. The shock continued at Republic Steel in Ohio, where prisoners witnessed continuous production of 10,000 tons of steel daily. The relentless blast furnaces ran without pause, fed by endless rail lines carrying iron ore from Minnesota and coal from Pennsylvania. The sheer magnitude defied German comprehension. This single plant produced more steel than the entire Ruhr region at its peak, noted the Observer. Oberl writer Paul Hartman, who had worked at Krupp before the war, confessed, "I thought I understood industrial production, but this was beyond imagination. They wasted more steel and spillage than we could produce." He noted the bitter irony. American workers complained about overtime while producing quantities that the Germans could not achieve even with the brutal efficiency of slave labor and double shifts. The summer 1944 harvest provided the final, definitive demolition of Nazi claims regarding American weakness. German prisoners labored across the Midwest, witnessing agricultural production designed to feed the world. In Kansas, they watched wheat harvest where single farms yielded more grain than entire. Across the vast American heartland, the sheer, monolithic scale of industrialized agriculture defied comprehension for the German prisoners, men who originated from the smaller, fragmented provinces of Europe. Giant combines traversed the fields, vast machines moving like ships navigating an ocean of ripening gold, each capable of harvesting an astonishing 100 acres in a single day. The colossal grain elevators that these machines quickly filled possessed the storage capacity to hold more wheat than the entire nation of Germany imported over the course of a full year. Unterfitzi of Franz Baer, a farmer captured from East Prussia, articulated this economic shock succinctly. One American farmer with machinery does the work of 100 German farmers. They were shown aerial photographs revealing wheat fields that stretched across thousands of square miles of continuous grain, an output so immense that America could lose half its harvest and still possess more produce than combined agricultural output of all of Europe. This staggering abundance was often coupled with an even more disturbing paradox. In California's Central Valley, where prisoners were assigned to pick fruit in orchards that stretched seemingly beyond the horizon, they witnessed the systematic destruction of perfectly edible food. Fruit, which would have been desperately treasured in hunger-ravaged Germany, was routinely discarded for the most minor blemishes. Entire crops were deliberately plowed under the soil to artificially maintain stable market prices, a concept of economic control so alien and cruel that it reportedly caused psychological distress and breakdown among prisoners who had known only scarcity. Gerda Otto Schultz recorded this shocking observation. They destroyed food to keep prices stable. Mountains of oranges bulldozed into pits because they had too many. We begged to be allowed to send them to Germany to our families. Though the American guards often showed sympathy, they were compelled to explain that sending the food was impossible. This deliberate waste, far from being accidental, served as a powerful, strategic proof of the seemingly unlimited resources available to the United States. The material shock reached its ultimate conclusion on June 6, 1944, when news of the Normandy invasion, designated Operation Overlord, finally reached the prison camps. German prisoners experienced their definitive and final ideological collapse. The sheer scale of the operation, a combined fleet of 6,000 ships supported by 11,000 aircraft, delivering 150,000 men in the first wave alone, demonstrated an American organizational and industrial capacity that far exceeded even the wildest, most ambitious projections of Nazi Germany. Prisoners housed at Camp Shelby were shown newsreels of the invasion within days of its execution. They watched the endless streams of supply ships, the revolutionary engineering feat of the artificial harbors, and a colossal logistical system that delivered 15,000 tons of supplies daily across open beaches. They were forced to watch their homeland being systematically crushed by the very nation they had been assured was decadent, weak, and incapable of sustained warfare. The realization was devastatingly comprehensive. Our Friedrich Vonnegut articulated the moment of truth. We knew then that everything was lost, not just the war, but the entire Nazi project. We had challenged the world's greatest industrial power with fairy tales and racial mythology. The technological disparity was stark. We sent horses against their trucks, rifles against their automatic weapons, courage against their unlimited resources. Yet, throughout their prolonged captivity, German prisoners of war experienced something that challenged the core tenets of Nazi ideology far more profoundly than mere material wealth: American humanity. Despite the relentless propaganda that had depicted Americans as inherently weak, effeminate, and overly sentimental, the POWs discovered a people secure enough in their overwhelming strength to extend genuine mercy. When Gerhard Hans Miller received word that his son had perished during the devastating bombing raids on Hamburg, the American camp commander personally delivered the Red Cross message, offering solemn and sincere condolences. Furthermore, when Lieutenant Paul Fisher's wife wrote detailing her struggle to feed their children amidst the collapsing German infrastructure, American church groups mobilized, successfully sending desperately needed food packages directly to her in Germany. These acts of grace, supporting enemy civilians in a nation America was actively engaged in destroying, represented a moral and ethical superiority that the Nazi worldview could never reconcile. The American strategy, articulated by Hetman Otto, drew a crucial line between the German populace and the Nazi regime, insisting they were fighting Hitler, but not the German people. What initially appeared to many prisoners as mere wartime propaganda soon revealed itself to be a deeply genuine commitment. The goal was not the destruction of Germany, but its careful preparation for post-war reconstruction. This philosophy was most vividly demonstrated through the unprecedented quality of medical treatment afforded to the captured soldiers. German physicians worked directly alongside American medical staff, participating in collaborative learning, accessing advanced equipment, and mastering new techniques. Prisoners received complex surgical operations that, back in Germany, would have been reserved exclusively for societal elite. Furthermore, the psychological wounds of war were addressed. Mental health treatment, virtually unheard of within the rigid structure of the Wehrmacht, was provided to traumatized soldiers. Dr. Friedrich Bauer recorded a profound shift in approach. They treated attempted suicides with counseling, not punishment. Prisoners with mental breakdowns received therapy, not beatings. This humanity toward enemies revealed a strength we never understood, the confidence of true power. By March 1945, the clandestine re-education program had begun yielding extraordinary results. Over 25,000 prisoners had willingly volunteered for comprehensive democracy courses. The camp newspapers functioned as vital platforms for discussing constitutional governance, the principles of free markets, and essential civil rights. Discussion groups vigorously debated the future trajectory of post-war Germany. The program's profound success dramatically exceeded all initial expectations. Men who had arrived as fanatical devotees of National Socialism were now composing detailed essays on democratic reconstruction, and officers who had once sworn unbreakable oaths to Hitler were actively planning the implementation of American agricultural methods in a future non-Nazi Germany. We became missionaries for democracy, admitted Aus Hermann Goering, no relation to the infamous Reich Marshal, in a 1975 interview. Not through coercion or propaganda, but through observation. We saw it work. We saw ordinary people living better than the German aristocracy. We wanted that for Germany. This ideological transformation was so absolute that American authorities grew concerned that the prisoners might be too enthusiastic about adopting American customs. Some even formally requested permission to remain in the United States after the war, while others established lasting bonds and married American women through structured prison correspondence programs. Thousands of these former combatants would eventually immigrate to America during the 1950s. The final, shattering revelation arrived in April 1945. As Allied forces systematically liberated the concentration camps across Germany, the horrific footage and photographic evidence were presented to the German POWs. Many initially dismissed the claims as crude propaganda, but the cumulative weight of the evidence proved overwhelming. Testimony from American soldiers, newsreels, and ultimately confirmed letters from within Germany detailing the atrocities. The psychological impact was utterly devastating. Men who had clung to some vestige of German honor, even in the face of military defeat, now confronted the complete moral collapse of their nation. Everything they had fought for was exposed, not merely as a lost cause, but as fundamentally evil. Hetman Walter Schmidt provided the most eloquent and tragic summary of this realization. We thought we were warriors for a great cause. We discovered we were tools of criminals. We believed we were bringing civilization to inferior peoples. We discovered we were bringing death. The German prisoners, taught to despise Americans as weak and decadent, were forced to confront profound irony. The victors demonstrated a level of humane civilization that the Third Reich had violently rejected. As the conflict concluded in May 1945, German POWs faced repatriation with a complex blend of apprehension and revelation. They had witnessed an America that fundamentally contradicted everything they had been taught, often eating better and being treated with greater dignity by their enemies than they had ever been by their own militaristic government. The final months of their captivity were devoted not to punishment, but to intensive preparation for return to a destroyed Germany. American authorities systematically implemented comprehensive re-education, offering vocational training, modern agriculture instruction, and political education. prisoners were exposed to the tenets of post-war Reconstruction, understanding the principles of the Marshall Plan before the official announcement, a clear indication that America sought to rebuild rather than merely punish its former adversary. Ost Friedrich von Tobin encapsulated this transformation, writing that the Americans prepared us to rebuild our country. They transformed defeated soldiers into future citizens. This display of generosity from the victors stood in stark contrast to historical expectations of vindictiveness. Between 1945 and 1946, a staggering 371,683 German prisoners of war were repatriated from American camps. They returned to a nation fractured, destitute, and divided, but they carried with them an invaluable and tangible asset, practical knowledge of how a flourishing democratic industrial society functioned. These former POWs, having directly experienced American prosperity and efficiency, became unwitting yet crucial agents of transformation in post-war Germany. They had internalized the lessons of robust industrial output, unparalleled agricultural productivity, and inherent stability of democratic governance, proving that successful reconstruction was achievable. Many individuals who passed through these American camps ascended to positions of prominence during West Germany's dramatic recovery. Hans Kroll, a prisoner at Camp Shelby, later served as the West German ambassador to the United States. Walter Hallstein, who taught classes at Camp Co., became the inaugural president of the European Commission. Rudiger von Marr, held at Camp Hearn, served as a German permanent representative to the United Nations, while Edward Ackermann, interned at Fort Robinson, became a seminal leader in German agricultural reform. They integrated American organizational methods into German industry, applied American efficiency to agriculture, and instilled democratic ideals into the nascent political system. The resulting economic miracle of the 1950s was fundamentally underpinned by the intellectual capital acquired within these prison walls. As Hans Kroll articulated in his memoirs, we learned that prosperity came from freedom, not conquest. We saw that democracy created wealth, that diversity brought strength. These profound lessons, absorbed during captivity, meticulously shaped the trajectory of the new Germany. Consequently, historians widely regard the German POW experience in America as one of the most successful re-education programs in modern history, demonstrating that without traditional coercion or heavy-handed propaganda, the sheer force of American industrial might and democratic success converted hardened former Nazis into committed future democratic citizens. The success of the American prisoner program lay not in targeted propaganda, but in the overwhelming evidence of objective reality. German prisoners witnessed American society operating at peak efficiency, treating its combatants with unexpected dignity, and displaying an industrial capacity that rendered German wartime production primitive by comparison. They experienced a standard of living, running water, plentiful food, central heating, that unequivocally exposed Nazi promises as hollow fantasies. Dr. Arnold Kramer, the leading historian of German POWs in America, articulated this profound psychological victory perfectly, concluding that America won the propaganda war not through clever messages, but through sheer reality. Every full meal, every electric light, every working toilet was an argument against Nazism. The POWs were converted by prosperity. This assessment is validated by cold statistics. Of the 371,683 German POWs held in America, fewer than 1% ever attempted escape, with only 2,222 total attempts recorded throughout the war. Post-war surveys indicated that a staggering 95% rated their treatment as either good or excellent. More remarkably, thousands maintained decades-long correspondence with the American families and communities they had encountered. The enduring nature of this conversion was formalized in 1985, on the 40th anniversary of the war's end, when surviving German POWs held a reunion in Austin, Texas. Over 500 former prisoners returned, many bringing their families to witness the exact locations where their transformation had begun. Former Arbeiter Hans Vea, who had been held at Fort Robinson, Nebraska, and later returned to become physician in Georgetown, Maine, reflected on the experience. Life in the camps was a vast improvement for many of us who had grown up in cold water flats in Germany. We discovered running water, central heating, and abundant food. But more than that, we discovered dignity. This sentiment was echoed by former Stabsfeld-Weibel Kurt Meir, who had worked on farms in Iowa, noting that the farmers treated them not as enemies, but as young men far from home. They shared their meals, their knowledge, sometimes their homes. This humanity from people whose sons were fighting against us. This change is forever. The keynote address at the 1985 reunion dinner, delivered by 78-year-old former Obus Herman Gutz, captured the essence of this epical shift. Gutz declared, "We came to America as enemies, as Nazis, as believers in a lie. We left as friends, as Democrats, as men who had seen the truth. America showed us that strength comes not from conquest, but from production, not from hatred, but from diversity, not from tyranny, but from freedom." He stressed that the prisoners had witnessed the arsenal of democracy at full production, observing farmers who produced food for the world and workers who built the tools of victory, all while treating their enemies with fundamental respect. Gutz concluded that America's true weapon was not its military might, but its inexhaustible capacity for creation and its unshakable confidence. The returning prisoners carried this philosophy home, believing that the Germany which rose from the ashes was built directly upon the lessons learned in American prison camps. They returned to their nation with a mission to build a society that could prosper through peace rather than war, a society that could create rather than destroy. We who came as conquerors left as students. Gutz summarized, acknowledging profound debt owed to America from former enemies who had become enduring friends. The auditorium erupted in a standing ovation, a powerful testament to the transformation achieved. Americans and Germans, former enemies united in recognition of a shift that had seemed utterly impossible when those first trains rolled into Texas in June 1943. The magnitude of the German prisoner war experience in America is most accurately measured in stark statistics, which reveal both the unprecedented scale of the operation and its remarkable, quiet success. Within a brief span, the camp infrastructure surged across the continental United States. Over 500 individual installations were established across 45 states. Every state except Nevada, North Dakota, and Vermont, a sprawling logistical network comprising 175 main camps supported by 325 branch camps. These facilities, designed to house populations ranging from 250 to 12,000 prisoners, were often constructed with astonishing speed, averaging just 90 days per camp. The total prisoner population reached 371,683 German personnel, comprising the vast majority of the 425,871 total Axis prisoners held, peaking in May 1945. The influx accelerated dramatically throughout the conflict. While 1943 saw an average of 20,000 new arrivals monthly, this figure rose to 30,000 monthly after D-Day and soared to 60,000 monthly in the final, chaotic months of the war. Their mandatory labor contribution became an indispensable component of the American war economy, filling critical agricultural and industrial shortages across 46 states. Records document 14 million man-days of agricultural labor completed, alongside the processing of 100 million board feet of lumber. This labor generated an economic value estimated at $230 million in 1940s currency, compensated at a daily wage of 80 cents per prisoner. Despite the sheer numbers, security remained overwhelmingly successful. Escape statistics underscore the efficiency and low threat level. From over 371,000 prisoners, only 2,222 escape attempts were recorded, a minuscule 0.6%. Crucially, there were 0 successful permanent escapes, with the vast majority of escapees recaptured within 24 hours, and no American civilians harmed by escaped prisoners of war. More profound than the labor output was a systematic educational effort designed to foster democratic ideals. Over 40,000 prisoners enrolled in formal educational courses. 135 camp newspapers were published. 30,000 took English classes. 15,000 engaged in vocational training, and 8,000 were afforded university correspondence courses. This exposure led directly to a dramatic ideological softening. Post-captivity assessment revealed a significant shift. 95% rated their treatment as good or excellent, and 74% believed their captivity had positively changed their worldview. A significant 61% expressed genuine interest in learning about democracy, while less than 10% maintained strong Nazi beliefs by the war's conclusion in 1945. The legacy of this internment endured far beyond V-Day. Approximately 5,000 former POWs immigrated to the United States after the war, and over 12,000 maintained steady correspondence with American families, an average duration of 31 years. Many returned years later, not as former enemies, but as tourists or business partners. The German POWs who experienced American industrial might were not merely spectators. They were fundamentally transformed by it. Their captivity became education, their defeat, enlightenment, and their imprisonment a liberation from the ideological chains of Nazism. Ultimately, America's greatest victory was not secured on the battlefield, but within the confines of prison camps, where the overwhelming, undeniable evidence of democratic prosperity accomplished what armies alone could not: the complete transformation of enemy minds. The soldiers who arrived in 1943 had been indoctrinated to believe in German superiority and American weakness. They departed knowing the truth. American industrial might was not just overwhelming. It was incomprehensible to minds shaped by scarcity and tyranny. The trains that had brought them into captivity had carried warriors. The ships that returned them to Germany in 1946 carried not merely defeated soldiers, but the unwitting architects of democracy. These German prisoners of war, veterans of the collapsed Third Reich, had witnessed a profound truth during their internment. The most potent weapon in America's arsenal was not its devastating military capacity, but the simple, overwhelming evidence of a free society's power to generate unprecedented abundance. They had seen the future, and its success was undeniable. Arriving on American soil, the German POWs had harbored the propaganda-fueled expectation of finding a weak, divided nation teetering toward collapse. Instead, they encountered an industrial colossus of unlimited power tempered by surprising, unexpected humanity. Initially stunned by the sheer scale of American industrial might, this awe quickly evolved into political conversion. In this profound psychological shift lay the genuine defeat of the Nazi dream and the crucial seeds of Europe's post-war redemption. The remarkable economic miracle that dramatically transformed West Germany throughout the 1950s, the Wirtschaftswunder, was fundamentally built upon the practical lessons internalized within these American prison camps. Here, former enemy soldiers learned a critical, enduring principle: that genuine prosperity stemmed not from territorial conquest or the delusion of racial superiority, but from the foundational tenets of individual freedom, human dignity, and democratic cooperation, replacing totalitarian control. They had arrived as prisoners of war, yet departed as compelling witnesses to the arsenal of democracy operating at its absolute peak. This first-hand awe at American abundance provided the psychological bedrock for the subsequent Atlantic Alliance, the monumental Marshall Plan, and the eventual democratic reconstruction of Germany. The transformation began specifically when 1,850 hardened Afrika Korps veterans stepped off a train in isolated Mexia, Texas, and realized the entire ideological structure they had fought for was fundamentally flawed. Their children would subsequently mature within a democratic Germany, firmly allied with the United States. The story of German POWs in America is ultimately a chronicle of redemption achieved through revelation. It proves that history's greatest victories are often secured not through destructive force, but through overwhelming demonstration, prosperity, and a consistent exercise of humanity over hatred. These transformed soldiers became democracy's most effective, if unwitting, ambassadors, carrying the seeds of Reconstruction back to a devastated homeland, a transformation accomplished not through coercion, but through the undeniable power of successful example. In the end, America's secret weapon was not just a capacity to produce more tanks and planes than any nation in history, but a capacity to transform entrenched enemies into steadfast allies through the simple power of example.